Hello and welcome to another episode of Nothing Ventured with me, Aarish. Today I have with me via Zoom Mukund Jha. Mukund is the co-founder and CEO of Emergent, an AI-driven software development platform launched to revolutionize how applications are built. Prior to Emergent, he co-founded Dunzo, a significant player in the Indian logistics space, and was a key part of Google's search ranking team. Mukund's journey reflects a blend of deep technical expertise in machine learning and a strong entrepreneurial spirit, driving innovations that aim to simplify software engineering. With Emergent, he's focused on automating coding to empower non-technical users and accelerate software innovation in a crowded market. In today's episode, we talk about how people don't want prototypes, they want products that work.
Users actually don't want prototypes. They actually want real software that they can run, their business on. They can launch a new idea.
How the last 30 years of growth has come from software, but has been limited to an incredibly small cohort of people.
There has been a very selective group of people who have been able to build software.
And how there are only 20 million developers in the world, but why that doesn't matter so much anymore.
Earlier, there was only 20 million people who could actually produce software, and suddenly you'll have a billion people who will be able to produce software, at a massive scale, at a massive pace.
How Emergent users have built software on platform that would have cost $2 billion to build traditionally.
Roughly about a couple of $1 billion worth of software has already been built on the platform.
And why vibe coding has created an entirely new TAM, and it's only just getting started. Let's get straight into it. Hi there, whilst I've got you for a second, I thought I'd reintroduce myself. My name's Aarish. I am the host of Nothing Ventured, the podcast where I talk to the people behind the stories that make the venture ecosystem go round. I'm also the founder of Emergent, a consultancy that provides fractional CFO support to venture-backed tech startups from C to Series B and beyond. If you enjoy the podcast, I would love it if you could rate and subscribe wherever it is that you listen. And should you ever want to chat to me about absolutely anything, do reach out to me on LinkedIn or on X. I'm always up for a bit of a natter. Right, let's get back into it. Mukund, really great to have you here with me today. I know we've taken a bit of time to get this in the diary, but I am super excited. Let's kick off. Emergent's growth has been notable, to say the least, despite, some pretty fierce competition. Given that so many platforms fall into the trap of focusing on UI, user interface, over functionality, what specific costs do you see emerging from this tendency, and how does it affect your strategy at Emergent to prioritize back-end efficiency instead?
Yeah, so when we got started on the problem, what we noticed was most of the other app builders in the market were mostly targeting front-end demo prototyping kind of use cases. And what we realized that users actually don't want prototypes. They actually want real software that they can run their business on. They can launch a new idea. And the big gap that we saw was, to really ship a production grade software, you need really high quality coding agents. And you also need infrastructure that supports app building, supports hosting, supports, security, deployment, all of those things. So we started thinking about, if you were to automate all of the software engineering, what would that world look like? So we started with building our own coding agents. We built SOTA coding agents. We were number one on Sweetbench. And then we sort of built all of the infrastructure around that to host and deploy your apps. And the gap that we were sort of filling was, how do we take a user from an idea to an actual app that actually works and functions? And for that, we had to integrate every single thing, natively, whether it's databases, backend, SM integrations, and build a really, really high quality coding agent which can actually deliver on complex apps. That's how we sort of got started.
Yeah. So my question, I guess, would be within that, right? So say someone like me who's I guess a bit beyond a hobby builder, right? But I've been building on, N8N as my kind of core orchestration layer, right? So let's say I've built a workflow or an automation or even, an agent on N8N, and I want to productize that. How easy is it for me as a non-technical user and founder to be able to kind of port that onto Emergent and make it work natively there?
It's actually super simple. All you have to do is just go and describe your idea in as much detail as you want. Our agents would actually ask clarifying questions from you to sort of understand your details better. They will sort of get started. They'll ask you clarifying questions, show you a preview of what is getting built. You test the app, you provide feedback back to the agent, and it'll sort of keep iterating on the software. And once you're done, you just press one button and deploy your software and get it running. And we support all these integration natively. So N8N, all of those things, like even
Got it.
though like we not built it in the platform, our agents are self-learning. So they learn over all of the apps that are getting built in the platform. And so anytime somebody would have built N8N before, like agents would have learned that. And, when you sort of go and build something, it'll sort of, be able to do all of those integrations automatically.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. So it shifts that entire product development sort of MVP to production ready, in the sense that previously, like, you might have to bring a software engineer or a development agency or a dev shop to build that MVP, and then from there you raise some finance, and from there you go and build the bigger product. Now that shifted so incredibly, I can basically, as a non-technical founder, build that MVP using these apps like N8N and others, and then essentially just move that onto something like Emergent to build that production ready app. And the incredible thing is, like, we're just getting started with this, right? So this is clearly going to improve. So my next question within that whole kind of chain is, as you've developed autonomous coding agents, which are, essentially aimed at automating that whole software development kind of process, what do you believe will be the unforeseen consequences of such a shift in human roles within tech, especially kind of considering and concerning those traditional skills like coding and problem solving? And more broadly, what does it mean for company building in an AI first world? Because it feels like every time you go on LinkedIn, someone is posting about having basically automated their entire back office, or they're now finance people are on LinkedIn building all sorts of FP&A apps. So yeah, I'd love to get your take as someone who is building for autonomous builders. How does this change the landscape?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the biggest shift that we are seeing right now is people who could not participate in software economy before are now, able to participate in the software economy. If you look at the last 30 years of progress in economy, largely has been on the back of software. Most of the top market cap companies are internet companies. And there has been like a very selective group of people who have been able to sort of, like build software. There are only 20 million developers out there. And now suddenly everybody can sort of build software. And from a niche personal idea, for example, one of the users built this movie Tinder match. She had a problem that, she and her spouse could not agree on a movie or a movie night, a problem that all of us face. And she built this Tinder app where, you swipe left, swipe right. And once you have a match, it stores, your list of movies that you both like. And you can think of simple ideas like that, which would have never found its way into the world. And somebody had closer to the problem had thought about this, and these things are coming out now. The other thing that we are seeing right now is just compression of roles. Right, earlier you required like a PM, a designer, a QA, a software developer to sort of really build software. And now all of this can be done by just one person. And internally at Emergent we're seeing like a designer actually build out apps, and a PM actually ship production grade application within the company. And so from our perspective, like what we think is that the sort of demand for software is almost infinite. Like as you build something, you want to build more, you want to keep building more on top of it. So I think this truly unlocks this potential of humans being able to express themselves, the ideas that they have, and shorten the gap from idea to sort of reality. And we're super excited to see where the world goes from here.
Like for me, and I've said this probably a few times on this podcast already, the most incredible thing is 3 years ago I tried to build a product that was not a particularly good product, right? Over the weekend, 2 weekends ago, I basically built what was in my head back then, which I realized was not a great product. It was in the kind of finance stack. But over 3 hours using Claude plus N8N or whatever, and I'm sure if I went on Emergent and developed it further, I could get it, even further out the box. But it was 3 hours to build basically a usable product, right? And what that says to me is essentially your limitation is no longer your ability to code. Your limitation is your imagination. But what that suggests to me is that you will have lots of micro builders emerge, right? People who are not trying to build venture scale businesses, which is often what was happening with a lot of the software businesses, especially sort of B2B SaaS type businesses, but people building niche, what we would have called once back in the day, lifestyle businesses, which they can bootstrap up to $1 million, a couple of million of revenue but with a fraction of the cost. And you threw out this like incredible stat when we first spoke, and I'd love for you to explain it more about kind of the value or the cost of all of the products that have been built on Emergent. Had they have been built 10 years ago, what it would have cost or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, we did some like back of the envelope, math on like how much value have we created, for the world, and that's something that we care about internally a lot. Like how much value have we created, and like I think back in the back of the math envelope math that we did was roughly about like a couple of $1 billion worth of software has already been built on the platform, right? And it's crazy to think about that. Like like 2 years back, like similar kind of software, like would have taken a couple of $1 billion worth of investment to actually build, and like that has been sort of vibe coded again by mostly non-technical users in just under 8 to 9 months, right? So that's kind of crazy. And what we are seeing that as models sort of improve, right, like you see that ceiling kind of going up, and people build more and more complex stuff.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like I had a conversation with a founder this morning. We were talking about bringing a CFO into his business, and for this is the first time this conversation has actually happened with a founder where they said, yeah, we want the CFO, but we want the CFO to essentially assist us to build out the intelligence layer that they are building within their business using these tools. And for example, this founder, he is a non-technical founder. He was a CFA himself, right? But he's not a trained accountant or whatever. So he wanted a CFO to come in and assist with kind of that orchestration or the infrastructure, or even what are the right questions to be asking as they develop this out. And I think like what is astounding to me is you can bring multiple domains together and build something from first principles, which would have been incredibly difficult to do even 3 years ago, right? Like forget even 10, 15 years ago, like even last year, right? This was probably not possible. And how do you think this shifts company building? Like, so how big is your team? Like, how do you think about how you're building your business in this kind of AI first and agentic first world?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a massive shift, and sort of we are trying to reimagine what the world or the company looks like with AI at the center of it. Like we are trying to internally develop an Emergent agent which knows everything about Emergent, and then anybody can sort of ask questions to it, and like give it task, for example, like find out what was the conversion rate tomorrow. How do I optimize that? And essentially, what like the way I mean, we are actually 120 people right now, and very very small engineering team, about 30 people engineering team right now. And most of the coding obviously happens through agents right now, and like a lot of the bottleneck is actually in figuring out what do we want to build, right? And like so the pace of execution is like really really fast. In fact, recently we had this like we were using Asana for our project management before, and we were paying like $4,000 a month. Very recently, like a month ago, somebody vibe coded a project management tool which is customized to emergence use case. Like we ship like 4 times a day. We want like we had this like oftentimes we'll go to stand-ups, and people would want to have a follow-up meeting. So now you have a one-click follow-up meeting button right built into this custom project management tool that we have built, and we just canceled our Asana subscription, which was costing us like $4,000 a month. And this is completely vibe coded on Emergent. And cool thing is that anybody can contribute to it. Like it's a team project. Go and add a feature to it. And we are seeing this like massive like explosion of internal tools that people are building within Emergent right now. For example, our customer support tool that we were using, we just canceled that and vibe coded a customer support tool internally. And this is built by the customer support team, right? So there's no developer involved, there's no PM involved. Like they know what they want to build, and they're building it, and we have sort of replaced our customer support tool using a tool that is internally sort of used. It also allows us to dog food the product internally really well. But like like we're internally saying that what the future is going to look like, where like people will sort of build their own software, which is very customized, and because so far like software has been like one size fits all, right? Like I mean, you kind of like force fit your workflow into the software versus software adapting to yourself. And I think we'll see like a lot of these things happening within the company. Second shift that we're seeing right now is like extremely agent first approach. So every team actually has an agent that they sort of maintain today internally at Emergent. For example, our recruitment team has a recruitment agent which actually goes and sources on LinkedIn. Like it actually can schedule your sort of interview it can ping sort of, engineers saying that, hey, like this slot is full and like let's choose another slot. And all of this has been internally built on top of Emergent, and we're seeing like work that would have taken us months to get done are getting done in weeks. In fact, like I was in a meeting like on Friday, and Friday morning we discussed an idea, like very complex idea, and Friday evening somebody showed me like, hey, this we have already built this, and it was completely vibe coded on top of Emergent. And so the speed of iteration is like really really fast now, and I think I definitely think that, like, people who are working inside AI native companies like have a very different exposure to the technology versus people who are not, right? And you're almost always on the bleeding edge of things. You are imagining what the future would look like, and pushing the boundaries versus, I think, people who are not in AI native companies, to them, like, I think the world is moving really slowly. For us, like, it's moving fast right now.
Well, I don't know. I would argue it's moving fast for a lot of us, but that kind of leads to that sort of question around, that shift in human skills, right? Traditional skills, right? Coding and problem solving, because everything you described, right? So if you've got your customer success team building an app on Emergent from first principles, presumably, like, there is a new learning, or there is a new skill set that these teams have to potentially start learning or engaging with, which is, again, how do you break down a problem into its smallest component parts, right? At least to the extent that, any of us that have used kind of any of the standard LLMs know that depending on how you phrase a question, you get a different answer, and so on and so forth. So that whole kind of role of prompt engineering, I guess, is probably what I'm talking about. Is that the shift that you think is happening within businesses more generally, and Emergent more specifically, that to really succeed, you have to understand how to talk to the machine?
I mean, I definitely think right now that's the thing that people, are people who are good at working with agents, people who are good at distributing tasks, people who are good at breaking things down, like, and breaking it down into verifiable steps, right? I think that is a skill that is getting rewarded right now, but I don't think it's very short lived. Like, I think, like, the way the models are progressing, I don't think like you need too much of prompt engineering. In fact, our agents are actually fairly smart that, like, even if you have prompted it in a bad way, like, they will sort of self correct. And especially once you have like long running agents, they sort of iterate and self correct. And like today, obviously, like, the skill is like, hey, like, how well can you describe the problem? How structured are you? Can you verify? Can you sort of support the agent in pushing it in the right direction? But I also think that this is like extremely short lived. As models get better, I think I think what's going to be important is knowing what you want to solve, right? And having that really tight feedback loop to iterate really, really fast on the output that you're getting.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess, that the question then I would then ask, and obviously for your teams at Emergent, they have the benefit of obviously the engineering team that you have and so on and so forth. But like for solo entrepreneurs or for SMEs that are in more traditional businesses, etc., like, I guess one of the fears, if I can call it a fear, is that they won't know if when a product, when they go through the process with Emergent and a product emerges, how quote unquote trustworthy that product is in terms of security, right, in terms of maintenance and all of those sort of things. And I guess, how would you address that question, or that concern from users?
Right. So I mean, like, one of the things that core principles that Emergent is built on is that we want to emulate what best software engineering teams in the world do, right? So the whole sort of platform is designed in a way, for example, best software engineering teams do code reviews, they do automated testing, they do, like, linters, they would sort of do security testing. And all of that thing is actually built into the platform. So like the moment you give a prompt, like, the agent will actually like first try to design, like write a design doc around the architecture of the things. It'll probably ask you some clarifying questions. Once it writes the code, it'll actually do a code review, self code review in terms of like, understanding whether the code has been written in the right way. It'll do autonomous testing, right? So you don't have to actually test the app. It'll actually go ahead and test all the features out. If there's a bug, it'll sort of auto resolve that bug and then sort of pass you back the output. And once and when you're deploying, we actually like run pre-deployment checks, which checks for any secret leaks, any security issues, any of the misconfigurations that you may have in production. So the platform is designed to be very, very robust. Obviously, like there is still sort of dependency in terms of like how you prompt and like how you iterate on things. And oftentimes, like agents would actually like build, let's say you have entered like 10 features, they'll probably build 6 of them for you in the first go. So you still have to sort of test and iterate on things. But from the experience perspective, like, it's fairly autonomous, and we take care of all of the best practices that needs to be there for your code to be maintainable, for your like platform to be scalable. It's deployed in a horizontally scalable manner. So, like, it scales as your traffic grows, like, and like, so we have sort of encoded all of the best practices, within the platform. And that's one of the reasons that, like we actually are able to produce like high quality production ready code, because we spend a lot of tokens in actually making sure the quality of the code is really, really high. And like continuously our effort has been to sort of improve the platform from security perspective. From, for example, like we do automated data backups, all of those things for our users automatically, because like our users are non-technical users, right? So for them it's fairly complex to understand some of these concepts, right? And we sort of really, really make it easy for them to sort of not have to worry about these complexities.
So I guess the question that flows from that then is, does there come a time, and presumably this would only be at scale, where that non-technical user does need someone technical in their team to either take the product further or maintain it further, or do you think that ultimately you could just run it on Emergent forever and you won't have problems, right? Or at least foreseeable problems?
I mean, right now, the way sort of system is built, for a medium size applications, you can actually trust on Emergent, and it'll basically scale and run for you, right? And I mean, we have had like applications that have had like 500,000 views a month, right? So I mean, fairly scalable. But obviously, like, as the complexity increase, you will hit certain limits, of what I can do today, right? But that limit is getting blown away like every single month, like when model comes out, right? So I think like so obviously, like, for medium-sized applications, like that like where you need to launch something, get your first set of users, run an internal process or a tool, like the application scales really, really well, and you can sort of maintain it on Emergent. Obviously, it goes beyond that. Then you might need a development team. You might need to find some support. And we are building a partner ecosystem which can actually plug in and help you out if you're scaling and things like that. In a year, like, the story will be very different. Like, the complexity level is going to keep increasing, right? And my prediction is that most of the apps that you use today, like, you'll be able to write code by end of the year.
I mean, I'm already happening, right? Like, 100% already. I mean, like, so my story with Emergent is my COO, had been working on like just building a time recording app, right, for our team, which she kind of hooked together with Google Sheets and Zapier and so on and so forth. She's now built that on Emergent, right?
Wow.
I haven't tested it. I mean, I've tested it a little bit, but I haven't. She's only just kind of built it. But from everything I've seen, it works, and it works in the way that it was intended to work, right? So and this is the point, right? Like, and you said this earlier. Rather than you trying to shoehorn your workflow into an existing SaaS, right, you can now build that exact specific, like CRMs are a great example, right? Where, all of the large CRMs, and, it's funny, I've started getting more inbound emails from a lot of those CRM partners saying, hey, have you ever considered using XYZ? And I'm like, of course I have, but actually I don't need to anymore, right? And I think, there has been a lot of talk about the death of SaaS. I don't know that is true. I also don't think that it is necessarily untrue, right? I think there is definitely a collapsing in how we think about buying versus building a tool, right? Sometimes it's not worth the headache, and if you can get what you need out of the one tool, then great, just buy it, right? But if you want a really super specific tool to your use case, actually today it's far more viable to just build that internally.
Totally. I mean, I think like SaaS softwares are like facing two massive headwinds right now. Like, one, I think like agents are like going to be primary users of this software. And what used to be like a human plus software combination to do the work, I think agents are able to do that much, much faster, much better. And I think it's going to sort of increase over time, like where agents will sort of start consuming a lot of this software themselves, right? So I think one sort of headwind is that where like most of the workflows where software is needed is getting automated by agents. And I think like a lot of the SaaS companies are making that shift where they are moving into agentic space, and that's great. A second headwind is obviously like like people building their custom software, like for simple things, for like like where like earlier you got a very bloated software with like things where you needed only like 5 things, and I think a lot of people would sort of vibe code those applications So I think I definitely think that traditional SaaS is definitely facing a lot of headwinds, and I think the companies that sort of pivot to being agentic first, like Intercom did, I think those are going to be surviving, but others will probably find it hard to sort of see this whole new sort of agentic wave of software that are coming online.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be very interesting times. Let's talk about very specifically vibe coding platforms, right? So we've seen a massive surge in valuations for these vibe coding platforms, right? And some people view that as indicative of a fundamental shift in software development, just as we've been talking about. But in that context, do you believe that that's actually a legitimate structural change in the industry? And it sounds like you maybe do, but or is it more of a temporary kind of hype cycle that might collapse under scrutiny?
I mean, I think it's super early, and I feel that all of us are extremely undervalued because this is a completely new TAM that is opening up right now, and all of us are growing really really fast, and it's almost, to me, it feels like the market is expanding faster than we can actually grab right now, and I mean, you can imagine earlier there was only 20 million people who could actually produce software, and suddenly you'll have like a billion people who will be able to sort of produce software, at a massive scale, at a massive pace, right? So, and I think every single fundamental sort of technology shift, has been viewed with the same lens that, hey, is this a fad? This, is this something reality? But I think the kernel is that we are seeing a lot of success stories on the platform where people have built mobile apps, they've shipped it to their users. There was a user who recently built out his own custom ERP to run his entire factory on top of that, and on a daily basis right now, right? And so I think the shift is real, and I think it's as models are improving, you'll see more and more people getting aware of what's happening. I mean, it's funny that I was reading the study the other day that only 5% of people in the world have used coding engines so far, right?
Yeah, and only 13% have used AI at all, apparently. Yeah,
right. So when, you can see that the market is big. That I think we are just in the first inning of these things right now.
No. I mean, I'm I would say I'm definitely on board with the potential here. I mean, the James who runs the studio here where I'm recording, he 2 weeks ago I came in and he'd built new websites for 2 or 3 of his, for his studio, for this other podcast that he's doing. He's building stuff. He's given agents access to kind of his books, his accounting, and they're finding stuff that he can review or needs to review or whatever it is, right? But it just means that you can do whatever you want to do right now. You may come up against a limitation for sure. What's really interesting to me is before the limitation was I can't build software at all, therefore I won't. Now the limitation is, the software is not doing what I want it to do and I can't vibe code it past that point. That's really frustrating. But that's still, leaps and bounds and just light years ahead of where we were, again, as I say, even 2 years ago. The fact that 6 months ago you couldn't build an Excel spreadsheet using these tools and today you can, that is just how quickly this is evolving. And, to your point, if it's only 5% today, in 10, 15, 20 years when my kids are in the workforce, etc., this in theory should just be the norm, right? I think this is how, well, unless something else shifts in a completely different direction. But I mean, certainly in terms of the paradigm we're in right now, it would be hard to imagine this being a fad, right? Because to your point, with other fads, let's say crypto, where the use case never really seemed to gel, occasionally you'd see something that worked, but more often than not, it just didn't make sense why you build this on Web 3 rather than Web 2. Whereas with agentic, with agentic software, with agents in general and vibe coding, etc., to your point, you're seeing these apps now in the wild. And actually, I did a Google search, I think, on a competitor earlier today, and sadly, it wasn't it wasn't Emergent, but their favicon on Google was the lovable favicon, right? So you can see that people are they're just going straight into this and using this wherever they can.
Totally. I think the value add is super high, and I think people who are the top 1%, who are using agents today, I think their productivity is skyrocketing.
Yeah, 100%. Listen, I know that you are tight for time, Mukund. I'm sure. It's very late over there where you are as well. So I wanted to round off with two questions that we ask all of our guests. So firstly, what is one thing that you have a contrarian conviction about from any area of life, whether that's work, politics, socially, or at home?
My worldview is that like we are going to be entering an age of like significant abundance right now, right? Over the next 5 years. And a lot of things that people worry about, like job loss and all of those things, like I don't think people will sort of, have to worry about that. I feel that everybody's going to live like a king. Right. I feel like, like as I'm a big AGI believer right now. So that as we get closer to that, I think the world we're going to live in like a maximum abundance world right now.
I mean, let us absolutely hope. And by the way, where I would fully agree with you is I think the whole, agents will replace all jobs and therefore there won't be any work for anyone. I think the other way around, I think agents will enhance, augment, and actually allow humans to do what they want to do rather than, what they're forced to do in order to earn a dime, right? Like, I think there is a massive opportunity there. And finally, so that we can get to know the real you, what is something that moves you emotionally or moves you the most emotionally?
I mean, I feel that like solving something that I thought was impossible, like really, really, fulfills me in many ways, right? And like somebody asked me recently, somebody who joined my leadership team, like, hey, what do you expect from us? Like what? And I told them like, hey, I expect magic, right? And that's sort of like my expectation. So I think whenever I think like I set myself for something that I thought was impossible and I get there, like that's something that sort of like moves me a lot in terms of just fulfillment. Like, hey, like this I thought was impossible, but I got there.
Yeah. Pushing the boundaries of the possible, right? Like I think, again, to your point, right? And you've built something phenomenal. I get that same feeling when I build like, I don't know, like a calendar digest app, right? Like, something that 3 years ago, I'm like, I can't afford to pay someone to build this for me. It's not worth it. I can just do that now, right? And I think it is an incredible feeling to build something and see it working. And yes, frustration with bugs and whatever, right? But equally, I've done this, right? It's that feeling as a child when you put your first Lego, Lego set together and create a Mufasa or whatever people build with Lego these days. But I think, I completely understand that kind of fulfillment and that emotion that you get doing something that you didn't think was possible or didn't think was within the realms of what you could do. Mukund, this has been a really incredible conversation, and I'm sure we're going to be seeing a lot of Emergent. I have it on my to-do list to get into it and use it for a couple of things that I've been thinking about recently as well. In the meantime, for our audience, where can they find you online? You on LinkedIn? You on Twitter? Where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, I mean, Twitter is probably the best way. X.com/Mukund Jha and fairly discoverable on X. I think X is the best way. My DMs are open. People can DM me. A lot of users DM me and like I love chatting with them.
Okay, amazing. And Emergent is emergent.sh, is that right?
Emergent.sh. Yes.
Okay, amazing. Well, we'll be putting those in the show notes. For the time being, Mukund, thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thank you so much. It was really, really fun. Thank you.